Michael Jackson, synthesizers, and 8-bit video games. That is what comes to mind when we think of the 1980s. But behind all this nostalgia, there were also much darker things in those times. Mysteries so disturbing that even today they continue to keep more than one person awake at night. So, get comfortable and turn off the lights, because these are 7 disturbing mysteries of the 80s. Remember that you can also listen to us on Spotify or your favorite podcast platform. How are you? Good morning, afternoon, or evening. Let's begin. The case of Don Decker, the Rain Man. At the other end of the world, in Pennsylvania, United States, during the winter of 1983, something quite unusual occurred. Don Decker was a 21-year-old man serving a light sentence in a local jail for theft. On February 24, he was granted a one-day leave to attend the funeral of his grandfather, someone Don did not appreciate at all, as according to his own testimony. He had suffered all kinds of abuse from him since he was 7 years old. However, any opportunity to get out of jail, even for a few hours, was welcome. That night, after the funeral, Don slept at the home of his friends, Bob and Jenny Kiffer. While getting ready for dinner and washing up in the bathroom, he felt an inexplicable cold and thought he saw the image of an old man wearing a crown in the mirror. After this, he discovered deep scratches on his wrist. But this was just the beginning of a series of events as disturbing as they were inexplicable. Later that same night, the family heard a loud crash and saw water pouring out of the house and falling to the floor. The drops seemed to sprout from the walls and ceiling without a visible source. Witnesses remember seeing puddles form out of nowhere and trickle down as if it were indoor rain. Disconcerted, they called the landlord, Roman Y., who verified that there were no pipes that could explain this leak. Faced with such a strange phenomenon, the Kiffers called the local police. But, contrary to what usually happens in horror movies, when the officers arrived at the house, the phenomena did not disappear. On the contrary, they began to intensify. Patrolman Richard Wolbert entered accompanied by Don and, as he recounted, he had not taken even 2 steps inside the house when he was soaked by a completely inexplicable indoor rain. The officer described drops that seemed to travel horizontally, hitting him in the chest and defying gravity. His partner, Officer John Baham, admitted he felt a chill down his spine upon entering and seeing something so unusual. Stunned, the police evacuated Don and the Kiffers to inform their superiors. Surprisingly, when Don and the Kiffers left the house, the rain stopped abruptly. After that event, they decided to go to a nearby pizzeria to try to calm down. But surprisingly, inside the pizzeria, the phenomenon repeated. Out of nowhere, hundreds and hundreds of drops began to fall inside the establishment. The owner of the pizzeria, Pam Crofano, watched in horror as it happened and, frightened, took out a crucifix and held it up to Don, who remained still with a lost look in a kind of trance. As soon as the metal touched his skin, Don screamed that his hand was burning. It was this reaction that confirmed to Pam that Don was possessed by something. Back at the house, the manifestations only worsened. The Kiffers said that the kitchen pots began to rumble on their own, and suddenly Don levitated a few centimeters before being thrown against a wall with violence. At the same time, more scratches appeared on his arm, this time in the shape of a cross. Faced with all this, the family asked for spiritual help. A pastor who was a friend of the family, named Justina Hull, prayed with Don for more than an hour, and when the prayer finished, the mysterious rain stopped. When the leave ended and Don returned to jail, things actually took a turn even more disturbing. Several guards reported that water was sprouting from the floor of his cell and rising up the walls, even flying laterally. On one occasion, Supervisor David Kinghold wanted to verify if all that was real and challenged Don with a test. Make it rain in my office. As soon as the challenge was issued, a drop appeared suddenly and hit him directly in the chest, soaking his uniform. Convinced that it was not a simple plumbing failure, Kinghold called the prison chaplain, Reverend William Blackburn, as he was convinced it had a supernatural origin. This is the Reverend's testimony on this case. I entered the cell and the first thing I felt was a smell of death, a stench 5 times stronger than a hospital room full of agony. I remember I opened the Bible and read passages out loud. The pages did not get wet. The water fell all around, but not on the Bible. That's when I understood this was something satanic. Then, after praying briefly, the phenomenon stopped. Reviewing his story, Blackburn added that Don began to cry and ask for forgiveness. The encounter ended without further incidents of rain, and since then, they never recorded this strange phenomenon inside the prison again. The case of Don Decker became famous during the 80s. Some paranormal witnesses speak of demonic possession or even a psychic power that allowed Don to materialize rain out of nothing. However, skeptics like researcher Robert Bartholomew argue for more earthly explanations. In his opinion, extreme stress and collective suggestion had altered the perception of all the witnesses. He even proposed a technical cause, an interior winter thaw, that is, an ice dam after a heavy snowfall that could have leaked water into the house, whether by a supernatural power or the cause of mass hysteria. The case of Don Decker continues to cause intrigue more than 40 years later. The Hollingwell Incident. On the morning of the 13th of July 1980, a charity parade of children's bands was to be held at the Hollingwell Field in Nottinghamshire, England, with some 500 children from 11 bands participating. No one imagined they were about to witness a strange event that would go down in history as one of the country's greatest mysteries. Around 10:30 inches the morning, a small group of children who were preparing to play with their bands began to collapse suddenly. Witnesses were horrified to see how they fell for no reason. In a matter of minutes, the grass track looked like a battlefield full of bodies. In the words of one of the police officers who arrived at the scene, the affected children presented strange and very varied symptoms. Many were vomiting. Others complained of intense dizziness, muscle weakness, and headaches. Some had nausea, stomach cramps, and a feeling of tingling or numbness in their extremities. Watery eyes and irritated throats were also common. One of the girls, 13-year-old Susan Rook, described her symptoms in the following way. "I felt like my legs and arms had no bones, and I had a severe headache." Another boy, 10-year-old Carrie Elliott, related, "I got weak, my stomach hurt, and then I fainted. Everyone was falling, and some were crying." Among the victims were not only boys and girls from the bands, but also about 15 adults and even 2 babies, in addition to 2 horses that became ill with the same symptoms during the following days. In total, more than 200 children and several adults collapsed within 2 hours, and 259 people had to be treated by dozens of ambulances in nearby hospitals. The commotion triggered a quick investigation. Rumors and theories immediately arose among those present. Some believed it was food or water poisoning. It was even said that it could be due to sweets, more specifically some gummy candies that could be poisoned, which sowed panic among the children. Samples of food and water were collected at the festival stalls, but the tests were negative. No bacteria or toxin appeared in the assays, and in the end, the cellars were cleared, having suffered the complaints of neighbors for days. The media speculated with the theory of an invisible toxic gas. The Daily Mirror, for example, launched a headline the next day that said, "A gas cloud strikes down the children," even though nothing had been proven. Soon, the phenomenon was linked to pesticides. It was remembered that days before, a nearby field had been fumigated with an insecticide called calxin, which contains tridmorph, a substance that is prohibited today. The idea that the wind had transported poisonous particles to the track was floated. However, local firefighters confirmed that the wind was blowing in the opposite direction to Hollingwell that day and found no traces of any toxic cloud. The hospital doctors noted that the symptoms were compatible with exposure to irritating vapors, but they could not identify any specific substance. Another hypothesis postulated that ammonia and bleach-based cleaners were used in the portable toilets, producing chlorine gas when mixed, which could also cause similar symptoms of burning eyes, coughing, and nausea. In several medical reports of the time, it was said that the symptoms fit cases of documented mass hysteria. This hypothesis suggests that the children were very tense because of the competition and had been standing in the sun for a long time, so when a few fainted, the others reacted in a chain. However, many parents and witnesses were dissatisfied with that explanation, as this hypothesis collapses when we remember that even some babies and 2 horses were affected by the same symptoms. Terry Bingham, one of the parents, declared, "We never got an adequate answer, and the authorities pushed us aside. To this day, this case remains surrounded by unknowns." The official investigation was never reopened, and the local council dismissed resuming the matter. After more than 40 years, the Hollingwell incident remains unresolved, leaving the door open to all kinds of assumptions. The disappearance of Antonette Cayedito. Antonette Christine Cayedito, 9 years old, was a girl from the Navajo tribe who lived in Gallup, New Mexico, with her mother, Teresa Penny Cayedito, and her sisters, Wendy and Sadie. On the night of the 5th of April, 1986, she was getting ready to go to sleep when her mother returned from a meeting shortly after midnight. Antonette was wearing a pink nightgown and settled into her bed. Penny saw her asleep for the last time, around 3 a.m. In the early morning, the stillness was broken by a knock on the door. Wendy, Antonette's sister, would remember years later having heard a man's voice saying he was Uncle Joe, asking them to open up. When Antonette opened the door, 2 men took her immediately. The girl struggled and screamed, but it was useless. They dragged her roughly to a brown van that started the engine and drove off at full speed. In just a few seconds, the strangers disappeared, taking Antonette with them. At dawn, Penny got up as usual at 7 a.m. and noticed something terrible. Antonette's bed was empty. She began to ask from house to house for her daughter, but got the same answer: no one had seen her. Wendy, who was 5 at the time, would not tell what she had seen that night until 5 years after her sister's kidnapping. According to her later statement, after those men took her, she went back to bed without saying anything, as she feared getting into trouble for what she had just seen. She believed that in some way they would blame her for having opened the door. Desperate, Antonette's mother called the police. That same morning, an immediate search was organized. Neighbors, volunteers, and authorities combed the nearby hills and canyons in 4x4 vehicles, on motorcycles, and even on horseback. Tracking dogs also arrived, but none could follow the girl's trail. No clothing or belongings were found outside the house, and there were no signs of a struggle at the door. A year passed with no news until the 12th of April, 1987, at noon, when something disconcerting happened. The Gallup police station received a call in which the voice of a girl could be heard, saying she was Antonette and claiming to be in Albuquerque. Before she could say more, an adult male voice interrupted, shouting, "Who told you that you could use the phone?" Then, the girl's screams were heard before the line was cut. The agents recorded 40 seconds of that call. Penny listened to the recording several times and affirmed with a broken heart that it was indeed her daughter's voice. Despite this, the origin of the call could not be tracked. Later, another possible clue emerged. In Carson City, Nevada, a waitress related that she had served a couple with a very thin teenage girl who, when eating at a restaurant, intentionally dropped the utensils on the floor again and again. When picking up the girl's plate from the table, the waitress noticed that underneath was a folded napkin with 2 handwritten messages that said, "Help me and call the police." But by the time the waitress picked up the plate, the couple and the girl had already left. As the years went by, disturbing rumors also arose about Penny, the mother. It was said that she had failed a polygraph test and given contradictory statements to the investigators, although formal charges were never filed against her. Those speculations fueled suspicions in some, but others believed in the mother's innocence and pointed out that she was visibly devastated by the disappearance of her daughter. In her desperation, the family even resorted to a traditional Navajo medicine woman. According to what they told, the woman performed rituals with crystals and assured them that Antonette was still alive. The medicine woman also affirmed that the girl was being held against her will somewhere in the American Southwest under threats of violence. The truth is that, despite the investigations and the years that have passed, Antonette remains officially reported as missing, and her case remains open to this day. The Ilkley Moor UFO Incident. On the 1st of December 1987, in Ilkley Moor, Yorkshire, England, one of the most discussed extraterrestrial encounters in the country took place. Philip Spencer, a retired policeman, was taking a morning walk across the moor on his way to visit his father-in-law. The morning was damp, cloudy, and foggy. He carried with him a camera and a compass. Suddenly, climbing a hill, he saw something impossible. A few meters away, stopped on the path, was a creature. It was small, about 1.2 meters tall, dark green in color, with a large head and thin arms. The being made a gesture with its hand, as if warning Spencer not to go any further. Despite the fright, Spencer took out his camera and took a photo of the scene. Moments later, according to what he related, that creature fled suddenly toward an object that was hidden behind the fog. Spencer ran in pursuit, but lost sight of it. The only thing he managed to see was the back of a white UFO composed of 2 discs, one on top of the other, rising with a loud buzzing sound and disappearing into the sky. Spencer could not take a photograph of the ship, but he did catch the strange creature on the hill. After the encounter, Spencer began the return to the nearest village, located about 30 minutes away on foot. To his surprise, upon arriving, he discovered that 2 hours more than expected had passed. According to the town clock, it was nearly 10. 0 inches the morning, but his watch read 8:15. But that was not all. His compass now pointed in the exact opposite direction, pointing south instead of north. Months later, Philip Spencer began to experience strange dreams. He saw starry skies and felt uncomfortable in the countryside. In addition, he remained bewildered by the lost time and the anomalous behavior of his compass. So, in search of answers, he turned to Peter, a UFO researcher, who suggested he try a technique unconventional for that moment: hypnotic regression to access the repressed memory of the event. The session was organized for the 16th of March, 1988, at the home of UFO researcher Arthur Tomlinson, and was conducted by Dr. Jim Singleton, a clinical psychologist. Peter Huff and journalist Matthew Hill were also present. Under hypnosis, Spencer described how he became paralyzed. He floated inside the ship where a voice told him to calm down. Then, a group of green beings identical to the one he had photographed performed medical examinations on him, inserting instruments through his nose and mouth. He narrated an intense sensory experience. He said he was shown a video of catastrophes such as nuclear explosions, famine, and floods. Then they showed him other images of which he refused to speak, affirming that the aliens do not want human beings to know. He related that they returned him to the moor just before he took the famous photograph. According to researcher Nick Redfern, just a few days after the encounter in Ilkley Moor, Spencer received a visit from agents linked to the British Ministry of Defense. An official file was opened on his case, and subsequently, 2 men dressed in black arrived at his home, supposedly to pressure him and dissuade him from speaking publicly about what happened. Redfern relates that these individuals acted with secrecy and subtle intimidation. They were seen photographing the exterior of the house and asking for Spencer indirectly, without identifying themselves clearly. Furthermore, it is known that various British agencies interrogated Spencer in the following weeks, which gave an institutional backing to the case. It was not an isolated anecdote, but a fact that caught the attention of official bodies. The story of the Ilkley Moor encounter became public quickly. For UFO enthusiasts, the case meant a notable breakthrough, an image that, although blurry, was seen by many as one of the best proofs of alien life ever captured in the UK. Laboratory studies, including an analysis by Kodak, confirmed that the photo showed no signs of editing, which reinforced the story. But skeptics pointed out that the image was incredibly blurry and affirmed that there was no possibility of identifying what it really showed. Some suggested it could be someone in costume, a homemade doll, or even a cardboard cutout. Even so, the mystery of Ilkley Moor continues to cause intrigue to this day. If you are enjoying this content, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe. You can also help us a lot by leaving a comment or recommending our channel to your friends. If you are on Spotify, you can rate us with 5 stars. The Haunted House of Jackie Hernandez. In 1988, after separating from her husband, Jackie Hernandez decided to start from scratch and moved with her son, Jamie, to a modest house in San Pedro, California. At first, the house seemed quiet, but very soon strange things began to happen. Everyday objects changed places without explanation. Furniture wobbled and fell for no reason, and at night, footsteps and muffled voices were heard that seemed to come from the attic. One afternoon, while Jackie and her friend Christina were washing dishes, a dark, foul-smelling substance began to sprout from the walls as if the house were bleeding. Jackie's new cat, restless, spent hours stalking empty corners and chasing invisible shadows. But the most terrifying thing of all happened one night. Jackie woke up and clearly saw the figure of an old man who was standing in the doorway of her room. The man stood looking at her fixedly with his hollow eyes, but the next instant he disappeared into the darkness. That vision left her frozen, but she tried to convince herself that perhaps it had been a simple dream. However, shortly after, she began to have a series of nightmares that left her very restless. In them, she saw a young sailor who was beaten with an iron pipe and thrown into the water until he drowned. When she woke from these dreams, the room seemed colder than normal, and the air, furthermore, had a fetid smell of rot, as if something from the nightmare had followed her from the dream into the real world. Desperate to understand what was happening, Jackie reached out for professional help. She contacted the famed parapsychologist Barry Taff, who arrived with his team of researchers equipped with cameras, recorders, and detectors to register any type of phenomenon. Soon, the devices began to fail in inexplicable ways. Batteries drained in seconds, Video recorders turned off by themselves just at the most intense moments, and the cameras showed orbs of light and strange shadows floating in the dark corners. The most shocking point happened one night in the attic. Photographer Jeff Wheatcraft was filming when he suddenly felt something invisible wrap around his neck. A cable or rope that he could not see began to lift him into the air, attempting to strangle him against a beam. Jeff managed to break free with great difficulty and fell to the floor with a pale face and a red mark on his throat, while the camera captured his body hanging for a few seconds above the floor. After this, the house became unbearable. So, at the end of 1989, Jackie decided to move again. This time she moved to a secluded trailer in Weld, North Carolina, hoping to leave all this nightmare behind. But the paranormal phenomena followed them there too. Shortly after, when Jackie, with the help of two neighbors, was moving an old television to a shed, these extremely heavy televisions of the 80s, suddenly the screen showed the ghostly face of an old man, the same emaciated man she had seen in San Pedro, who was looking at her with his hollow eyes from the corner of the image. That night they heard something hitting the walls from inside. Stunned by terror, Jackie called Barry Taff and his team again, and upon their arrival, once again, all the electronic equipment began to fail for no reason. The cameras turned off, the flashlights stopped lighting up at critical moments, and in desperation, Jackie accepted using a Ouija board to attempt to communicate with whatever was tormenting her. During this session, the table shook violently, and suddenly an invisible force threw Jeff Wheatcraft against the wall. Even so, they managed to communicate with this entity, who confessed that he had died about 6 decades earlier in the San Pedro Bay, as he had been drowned by an attacker. He claimed he had not died in the house, but in the sea. And with these clues, both Jackie and the researchers were able to find old news about a man named Herman Henderson, a sailor whose body was found lifeless in the port in 1930. The following week, Jackie returned to the San Pedro house for other matters, without imagining that she would live one final, completely chilling phenomenon there. When the sun went down, she was walking along the street adjacent to the old house when suddenly, in the air, a sphere of bright white light appeared, capable of illuminating several meters around. The ball was floating about 30 centimeters from the ground and moved with a slow and deliberate pace, heading toward the nearby cemetery. Without thinking too much, Jackie decided to follow that light, crossed the rusty fence of the cemetery, and arrived at the tomb of John Damon, who had built the house decades earlier. The sphere stopped right above the pink tombstone with his name engraved in simple letters, as if it were pointing to it. And then, this ball disappeared after giving a few turns. That moment remained registered both in Jackie's memory and in the testimonies of close people who saw the peculiar glow she had been following. For Jackie, this was the sign that that entity that had tormented her had somehow managed to transcend. All this story rose to fame thanks to a documentary titled An Unknown Encounter, where Barry Taff presents the most shocking scenes he managed to capture, as well as the terrified testimonies of those present. Jackie herself insists that she has never experienced anything like it since. The case of the San Pedro haunted house remained an unsolved mystery of the 80s that, even today, can make the blood run cold for anyone who hears it. The case of Sigmund Adamski. Sigmund Adamski was a 5-6-year-old minor, born in Poland and settled in Tingley, West Yorkshire, England, after the Second World War, where he worked at the Lofthouse Colliery coal mine and married Leocadia Jawalska in 1951. His health was fragile. He cared for his wife, who was ill with multiple sclerosis and suffered from a lung disease due to the mine dust. He had requested his early retirement because of that, although he had not yet received an answer. Additionally, Adamski was excited about reading a passage at his goddaughter's wedding that week, an event for which he had already prepared a special suit. On the afternoon of Friday, the 6th of June, 1980, around 3:30 p.m., Adamski left his house to go to the local store to buy provisions. He walked, greeting a neighbor as usual, entered the store, and paid for his regular purchase, but he never returned. As night fell, his wife's concern grew. Seeing that Sigmund did not return, she called the police, and a search began. 5 days passed without news, and every hour the bewilderment grew. Sadly, Sigmund would never return home alive. On June 11, at noon, a warehouse worker at a coal yard in Todmorden, more than 20 miles from Adamski's home, discovered a body lying on a pile of coal about 10 feet high. The discovery froze everyone's blood. Sigmund Adamski lay face up, as if his body had been carefully placed there, with his face frozen in what several described as a grimace of terror. The details were even stranger. The man was wearing a full suit, but curiously, he had no shirt under the jacket. Furthermore, both the suit and his underwear were inexplicably clean, free of the black dust of the pile of coal on which he was found. This suggested that Adamski could not have climbed that mound by himself, but that his corpse had been deposited there. His watch, his wallet, and even his wedding ring were missing and were never recovered. The back of his head, neck, and shoulders showed strange circular burns treated with a greenish-yellow ointment that the forensic experts could not identify. On top of that, his hair had been trimmed crudely, and his beard barely showed a day of growth. It was as if someone had dressed him after his death. The jacket was poorly buttoned, the pants were open, and the shoes were well tied. There were no signs of a struggle or any physical aggression. The coroner, James Turnbull, was perplexed by the autopsy. He noted the burns treated with that unknown ointment and noticed that Adamski had undigested food in his stomach as if he had eaten shortly before dying. Finally, he ruled the cause of death as a heart attack, although he did so with an open verdict, admitting openly that he could not answer the question of where he was before dying and what led him to death. That is to say, there was no clear explanation for that heart attack, nor for the place where he appeared. Turnbull himself would later confess that the Adamski case was the greatest mystery of his entire career as a coroner. From the beginning, very diverse hypotheses circulated. Some researchers proposed unusual natural causes, such as a ball lightning that had passed through Adamski's body, causing the burns and leaving him unconscious until he died on the mound. Others suggested an unknown accident or catastrophe. However, the idea of a crime did not take long to sprout either. Perhaps someone had kidnapped him and ended his life. These were times of the Cold War, so dark rumors arose. Even some newspapers pointed to Soviet KGB agents as possible perpetrators, but no clue appeared to support that theory. Among the most terrifying theories was alien abduction. The element that fueled that rumor was the testimony of one of the policemen involved. Officer Alan Godfrey, a young officer from Todmorden, was one of the first to climb the coal pile where Adamski's body was found. Godfrey commented afterward that something in Adamski's face gave him chills. The deceased seemed to have died of fear, according to his words. Months later, Godfrey would star in another strange event very close by. On the 28th of November 1980, he was sent to look for loose cows near Burnley Road. Then he said he had seen a large, bright object floating in the sky shaped like a diamond. It measured about 20 by 14 feet, spun silently, and emitted lights. Godfrey lost track of time. He lost about 25 minutes and suffered physical discomfort. Under hypnosis, he related later that after a blinding flash, he found himself aboard a mysterious ship, being examined by several tiny little creatures and a tall, bearded humanoid being. When those shocking statements were leaked, the press did not take long to link both cases. The policeman admitted to the media that he could not rule everything out and that he was very open-minded regarding extraterrestrials. Thus, the combination of the inexplicable injuries on Adamski's body and Godfrey's UFO experience fueled the idea of a kidnapping from out of this world. 50 years later, the story of Sigmund Adamski figures in documentaries, mystery articles, and online forums. To this day, the death of that Polish miner remains shrouded in mystery, and the case remains one of the most disturbing enigmas of England. The strange fate of Granger Taylor. Granger Ormond Taylor was born on the 7th of October 1948 in Duncan on Vancouver Island. As a child, he suffered a very hard blow. His father drowned in Horn Lake during a family vacation, something that deeply marked his life and his way of seeing the world. Many people who knew him say that that event pushed him to look for answers beyond the obvious, as if he wanted to fill that void with something greater than himself. From a very young age, he stood out as a self-taught mechanic. He left school early and set up his own workshop at home, where he repaired a single-cylinder car, a bulldozer, and even an old steam train, and he even restored a Second World War P-40 Kitty Hawk. In the family backyard, he built a strange metallic ship shaped like a saucer, constructed with old radio satellite dishes and scrap metal, equipped with a stove, a sofa, and a television. He himself slept inside this homemade UFO while he pored over science fiction books and manipulated circuits that he assembled with old parts. Granger claimed he maintained communication with extraterrestrials. According to what he told, one night he was contacted by them in dreams, and he used a homemade CB radio set that he had built to receive their messages. And so, on the night of the 29th of November 1980, Taylor disappeared mysteriously after leaving a note on the door of his parents' room. In it, he announced that he would leave on an alien ship for a 4-2-month interstellar journey, and that he left all his belongings to his parents, trusting even his loyal dog, Lady, to the family's care. On the back of this message appeared a hand-drawn map showing the outline of Waterloo Mountain and an X marking a specific place. This mark was followed by the investigators and served to focus part of the search, although nothing was ever found there directly connected to his disappearance. It is known that he left in his Datsun pickup truck and headed into the night. The police organized an extensive search by air and land, but there was no trace of Taylor and neither of his vehicle. That night was especially brutal. A historic storm whipped Vancouver Island with violent gusts and a torrential rain that made the search efforts enormously difficult. The wind also tore up some trees and left roads impassable, which perhaps helped to hide any clue about what really happened to Granger. 6 years passed until March 1986, when forestry workers discovered a large crater near Mount Prevost. There were the rusted remains of his truck, scattered fragments of metal, shreds of cloth from a shirt of his, and a few splinters of human bone. The coroner's experts concluded that Taylor was carrying dynamite in the vehicle and that at some point, that cargo simply exploded. It could not be determined if this was an accident or something deliberate. Finally, on the 30th of November 1986, the forensic authorities of British Columbia officially declared Granger dead. They did so based on the fragments found, although the complete body never appeared, and a DNA test was never done, since at that time this technology was not yet used. This has generated speculation, since, not being confirmed by DNA, it is not possible to know with certainty whether these remains belong to him or not, as much as it is the most logical thing. More than 4 decades have passed since Granger Taylor disappeared. His note about a 4-2-month interstellar journey, his homemade ship in the backyard, and the mysterious map with an X marked on Waterloo Mountain make more than one person wonder what exactly happened that night. Taylor's mother and some of his friends always believed his message was real, that perhaps, just perhaps, that night he really did board a ship and that, if so, it could be that one day he returns from that interstellar journey. Thanks for subscribing, leaving your like, and following us on social networks. We hope you enjoyed these mysteries. And without anything more to say, I say goodbye. See you next time.